What happens to a man after he kills his own brother, and God himself speaks the punishment? That is the question no one asks enough. We talk about Cain's crime. We talk about Abel's blood crying from the ground, but we rarely follow Cain after he walks away. We rarely ask where he went, what he found, and what kind of world he built with blood still on his hands. The book of Genesis tells us something brief but heavy. Genesis 4:16 says Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. One verse. That is all the Western Bible gives us. One line about a man who changed the course of human history. But that single verse hides a story so deep, so disturbing, and so relevant to our world today that entire ancient libraries were devoted to explaining it. Most people assume Cain simply wandered off into the wilderness and lived a hard, lonely life. They picture a broken man walking through empty deserts with nothing ahead of him. But the ancient texts preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church tell a very different story. These texts, including the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Book of Adam and Eve, reveal that Cain did not just survive, he thrived. And the way he thrived will challenge everything you thought you knew about the early chapters of the Bible. In this story, we are going to take a journey that moves in three clear directions. First, we will uncover what really happened to Cain after his exile and why the mark God placed on him was far more than a simple sign of protection. Then we will step into the land of Nod itself and discover that it was not just a place on a map, but something far stranger. A threshold between worlds where fallen angels walked among men and taught them secrets that were never meant for human minds. And finally, we will trace the fingerprints of Nod through history and into our modern world, where the same patterns of forbidden knowledge, power, and the blurring of boundaries between human and something else continue to repeat in ways that should make every one of us pay attention. And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. Let us start with the mark. When Cain killed Abel, God did not destroy him. That fact alone should make us stop and think. The creator of the universe looked at the first murderer in human history and chose mercy over justice, but it was not ordinary mercy. Genesis 4:15 says the Lord set a mark on Cain so that no one finding him would kill him. For centuries, scholars have debated what this mark was. Some say it was a physical scar. Others say it was a change in skin color, but the Ethiopian texts suggest something far more unsettling. They describe the mark as a transformation, not just of the body, but of perception itself. According to these ancient sources, when God marked Cain, something shifted inside him. His eyes began to see things that normal human eyes could not. The boundary between the physical world and the spiritual world grew thin for him. He could sense presences that others could not feel. He could perceive dimensions of reality that were hidden from his parents and from the rest of humanity. This was not a gift, it was a consequence. The blood of Abel had opened a door in Cain that could never be shut again, and the beings waiting on the other side of that door had been watching for exactly this moment. Think about that for a second. The first act of murder in human history did not just end a life. It cracked open a wall between two worlds. And through that crack, something ancient and patient began to reach toward humanity. Subscribe for more biblical revelations that go deeper than anything you have heard before. Now, Cain walked east. That direction matters more than most people realize. In the ancient Hebrew worldview, east was not just a compass point. It was a symbol. Adam and Eve were driven east out of the Garden of Eden. East meant away from God's presence. East meant deeper into the wilderness of a fallen world. So when Genesis says Cain went further east, it tells us something spiritual. He was moving further away from the source of life, further into territory that belonged to other powers entirely. The Ethiopian Book of Adam and Eve describes Cain's journey in detail that Genesis does not provide. It speaks of Cain hearing voices as he traveled, not human voices, something older, something that had been waiting in the spaces beyond Eden since before the fall. These voices promised Cain that his punishment was unjust. They told him that God had favored Abel unfairly. They whispered that the ground, which now refused to yield its strength to Cain, could be made to obey again, but only if Cain was willing to learn from teachers other than God. This is where the story takes its first dark turn. Cain was not simply a wanderer who stumbled into a strange land. He was guided. Something was drawing him toward Nod like a current pulling a boat downstream. And when he arrived, he found that Nod was not empty. It was waiting for him. The land of Nod, according to these ancient sources, was already inhabited by a presence, not human, not animal, something in between. Something that had fallen from a very great height and had been building in the shadows ever since. If this truth is already shifting what you thought about Genesis, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it, because what comes next goes even deeper. The beings that waited in Nod had a name. They had a plan, and Cain was the key to making that plan work. The question is, what did they want? And why did they need a murderer to get it? The answer lives in the next chapter of this ancient and terrible story. Chapter 2, The Land Where Reality Bends. The word Nod in Hebrew means wandering. But the ancient texts tell us that this name carries a meaning far heavier than simple restlessness. Nod was not just a desert where a guilty man roamed without direction. It was a region where the rules of the natural world did not apply the same way. The Ethiopian texts describe Nod as a threshold, a border zone between the world God had created for humanity and something else entirely, a place where the walls between the seen and the unseen had grown dangerously thin. To understand why this matters, we need to step back and remember what the world looked like in those early days. According to Genesis, creation operated under boundaries. God separated light from darkness. He separated the waters above from the waters below. He separated land from sea. Everything had its place. Everything had its limit. These boundaries were not just physical. They were spiritual laws, and Nod was the first place on earth where those boundaries began to fail. The Book of Jubilees hints at this when it describes the region east of Eden as a place of spiritual disturbance. The land itself responded differently there. Crops grew in strange ways, animals behaved oddly, and at night, the air seemed to hum with a frequency that could be felt but not heard. This was not natural. This was a place altered by a presence that predated Cain's arrival. Now here is where it gets truly fascinating. When Cain entered Nod, he did not find an empty wasteland. He found traces of habitation, structures that should not have existed, patterns carved into stone that followed geometric principles no human of that era should have known. The Ethiopian Book of Adam and Eve speaks of Cain discovering signs of intelligence in Nod that did not match anything his parents had taught him. These were the signatures of beings with knowledge that surpassed human understanding. Who built these things? The texts give us an answer that most Western churches have been uncomfortable with for centuries. The builders were the watchers. They were angels who had been assigned to observe and guard humanity, but they had abandoned their post. They had left their proper dwelling, as the book of Jude says in verse 6, and they had come down to the earth with an agenda that went far beyond simply watching. The watchers had been in Nod before Cain arrived. They had been preparing, and what they had prepared was an invitation, not written on paper, written into the land itself. The geometric patterns Cain found were not decorations, they were signals. They were calling cards left by beings who wanted to make contact with humanity on their own terms, outside of God's design, outside of God's authority, and outside of the boundaries that kept creation in order. Comment below if you have ever wondered why Genesis gives us so little detail about what happened after Cain left. The silence in the Western text is deafening, but the Ethiopian tradition fills that silence with a story that will shake you. When Cain encountered these signs, something inside him responded. Remember, the mark God had placed on him had altered his perception. He could see what others could not, and now standing in Nod, surrounded by patterns and presences that vibrated at a frequency his new senses could detect, Cain understood something terrible. He was not the first to arrive here. He was expected. The watchers had seen his crime. They had watched the blood of Abel seep into the ground. They had observed how murder had cracked open a door between worlds, and they had calculated that Cain, marked and altered, carrying the weight of the first human death in his soul, was the perfect vessel for what they wanted to do next. What did the Watchers want? According to 1 Enoch, chapter 6 through 16, they wanted to bridge the gap between the angelic and the human permanently. They wanted to create a hybrid civilization, not by force, by seduction, by offering knowledge so powerful, so beautiful, and so intoxicating that humanity would willingly choose to cross the line that God had drawn. And Cain, the exile, the marked one, the man who had already crossed the greatest line in human history by killing his own blood, was their chosen doorway. The land of Nod was not just geography. It was a laboratory. It was a staging ground for the most ambitious rebellion against the created order that the universe had ever seen. And Cain, whether he fully understood it or not, had just volunteered to become its first human partner. But the Watchers were patient. They did not reveal everything at once. They started with small gifts, small pieces of knowledge, a better way to work metal, a new way to organize sound into music, techniques for breeding stronger animals. Each gift seemed harmless on its own. Each one seemed like progress. But together, they formed a curriculum designed to do one thing: to make humanity believe that it did not need God, that it could build its own paradise, that the boundaries God had set were not protection but prison walls. Like this video, if you were beginning to see how deep this ancient story really goes. And the darkest part? It worked. Within just a few generations, Cain's descendants would build things that should have been impossible. They would master skills that normally take civilizations thousands of years to develop. They would create a culture so advanced, so beautiful, and so corrupt that God himself would look down and say that every thought of man's heart was only evil continually. That verdict from Genesis 6:5 was not about simple bad behavior. It was about a corruption so deep that it had entered the very fabric of what it meant to be human. The question that hangs over all of this is simple: how did it happen so fast? How did one family, in just a handful of generations, go from exile and wandering to building a civilization that rivaled anything the ancient world would see for millennia? The answer waits in the next chapter, where we meet the Watchers face to face and learn exactly what they taught the children of Cain. Chapter 3. When Angels Abandoned Heaven. The Book of Enoch names them, not with vague titles or shadowy descriptions. It names them like a police report names suspects. Semjasa was their leader. Azazel was their weapons expert. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the signs of the stars. Sariel taught the course of the moon. Amaros taught the resolving of enchantments. There were 200 of them in total. 200 angels who made a pact on the summit of Mount Hermon to descend to earth and take human wives. And according to 1 Enoch chapter 6, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew it was a crime. They bound themselves with mutual oaths so that none of them could back out. This was not a moment of weakness. This was organized rebellion. Now, most people have heard some version of this story. They know that Genesis 6:14 mentions the sons of God taking the daughters of men, but few people understand the scale of what happened. The Watchers did not simply fall in love with human women. They executed a strategy. They came with a plan to infiltrate humanity at every level, to corrupt the bloodline, to introduce knowledge that would make humans dependent on angelic power rather than divine provision. And they used Cain's already compromised lineage as their primary point of entry. The timing was not accidental. By the time the Watchers made their move openly, Cain's descendants had already been receiving small doses of forbidden knowledge for generations. Their minds had been prepared. Their spiritual defenses had been weakened. They had already tasted what angelic knowledge could do. The metallurgy, the music, the animal breeding techniques. These were appetizers. The main course was about to be served, and it would change the human race forever. 1 Enoch chapter 8 gives us the menu. Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates. He taught them about metals from the earth and the art of working them. He also taught them about cosmetics, precious stones, and coloring dyes. Destruction and seduction in the same lesson. Give people the power to kill. Then, give them the beauty to justify it. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the revelations in this story only get more intense from here. But Azazel was just one teacher. Semjazel taught enchantments and the cutting of roots, which scholars understand as sorcery and pharmacology combined. Amoros taught countermagic, creating an arms race of spiritual manipulation. Borokial taught astrology for purposes of divination. And there were others who taught things that the Book of Enoch describes in terms so careful that even the ancient scribes were uncomfortable writing them down. What we are looking at is not a few rogue angels making bad decisions. This was a university of forbidden knowledge with a full faculty and a deliberate plan to educate humanity away from God. The Ethiopian traditions call these teachings the secrets of heaven, not because they came from God's throne room, but because they were secrets about how creation worked at its deepest level. Secrets about energy, matter, consciousness, and the manipulation of forces that God had reserved for divine hands alone. And here is the part that should make you uncomfortable. The knowledge worked. Cain's descendants did not just learn theory, they applied it. Jubal became the father of those who dwell in tents and raise livestock. That sounds innocent until you realize that the Ethiopian texts suggest his breeding programs went beyond normal animal husbandry. He was crossing species, testing the limits of biological boundaries in ways that mirrored what the Watchers were doing with human genetics. Jubal became the father of all who play the harp and the flute. Music, beautiful, moving, soul-touching music. But according to the Book of Adam and Eve, the music that Jubal created was not just entertainment, it was a technology. Specific combinations of sounds and rhythms could alter human consciousness. They could open the mind to spiritual experiences that bypassed rational thought. They could make people more susceptible to influence from the unseen realm. The Watchers did not give humanity music as a gift, they gave it as a tool for programming the human mind. Then there was Tubal Cain, the instructor of every craftsman in bronze and iron. Metallurgy at a level that should have taken thousands of years to develop in a single generation. The ability to forge weapons, build structures, and shape the material world in ways that no primitive society should have been capable of. This was not natural human progress. This was a download. Information transferred directly from angelic minds to human hands. Share this with someone who still thinks Genesis chapter 4 is just a simple family tree, because the truth buried in these verses will keep you thinking for days. But the most dangerous knowledge the Watchers shared was not about metals or music or animals. It was about identity. The Ethiopian traditions speak of what they call the School of the Sons of Twilight. This was an inner circle of teaching reserved for Cain's most devoted descendants, and the central lesson of this school was simple and devastating. You are unfinished. God created you incomplete on purpose. He held back your full potential because he was afraid of what you would become. But we can complete you. We can show you how to become like gods. That promise should sound familiar. It is the same lie the serpent told Eve in the garden. You shall be as gods. But this time, it was not just words. The Watchers had the technology to back it up. They could demonstrate superhuman abilities. They could show results. They could point to the hybrid children already being born and say, look, the merging has already begun. The old boundaries are falling, the new humanity is rising, and the children of Cain, dazzled by power and beauty and the intoxicating rush of forbidden knowledge, believed every word. The stage was now set for the most disturbing chapter in this ancient story. The Watchers had their human partners, they had their school, they had their technology, and they were about to build something that would make God himself take notice and respond with the most devastating judgment the world had ever seen. But before the flood, before the destruction, there was the city, and the city of Enoch was unlike anything that had ever existed on earth or has existed since. Chapter 4. The city built between two worlds. Genesis 4:15 says that Cain built a city and named it after his son Enoch. One sentence, 14 words in English. And hidden inside those 14 words is one of the most extraordinary events in the ancient world, because the city of Enoch was not just a collection of houses and walls. According to the Ethiopian texts, it was a machine, a spiritual machine designed to do something no human settlement had ever attempted before. It was built to thin the boundary between dimensions, to make the invisible visible, to turn an entire city into a gateway. Now, we need to slow down here because this is where the story gets complicated in the best possible way. The Watchers who had come down to Earth carried knowledge of how creation was structured at its most fundamental level. They understood the geometry of existence. They knew that certain shapes, certain ratios, certain spatial arrangements could interact with spiritual forces in measurable ways. This was not superstition. This was engineering. Engineering that operated on principles modern science is only beginning to glimpse. The city of Enoch, according to the Ethiopian tradition, was constructed as a mandala, not a decorative pattern, but a precise geometric layout designed to attract and channel spiritual energies. Every street, every building, every wall was positioned according to ratios that reflected the structure of creation itself. The Watchers provided the blueprints. Cain's descendants provided the labor, and together, they built something that was both a city and a portal. The principle behind this architecture was what the ancient texts call correspondence. The idea that patterns in the physical world mirror patterns in the spiritual world. And if you build physical structures that match certain spiritual configurations exactly, you create a point of contact, a bridge, a thin place where the traffic between worlds becomes easy and constant. The city of Enoch was designed to be the thinnest place on Earth. If this is blowing your mind, like this video and tell me in the comments what you think the city of Enoch really was. Your interpretation matters because this story belongs to all of us. Consider what daily life must have been like inside those walls. The residents of Enoch did not simply go about ordinary human business. They lived inside an active spiritual conductor. The geometry of their streets channeled unseen forces through their daily routines. The sounds of Jubal's music echoed through corridors designed to amplify their effects. The metals forged by Tubal Cain's workshops were smelted in furnaces positioned at nodes of energy. Everything was connected. Everything served the greater purpose of breaking down the wall between the human realm and the angelic one. The Book of Adam and Eve provides details that sound almost impossible. It describes lights in the city that did not come from fire. It describes sounds that came from the air itself. It describes a sense of presence so thick that newcomers would feel different within hours of entering. Their thoughts would change. Their perceptions would shift. They would begin to see shadows at the edges of their vision. Shapes that moved with purpose. This was the Watcher's masterpiece. Not just a city, a controlled environment for the transformation of the human species. Every person who lived within those walls was being gradually changed, not just culturally, not just spiritually, but at the deepest levels of what they were. The architecture itself was rewriting them. The sounds were reprogramming their minds. The geometric patterns were aligning their bodies with frequencies that had never been intended for human flesh. And the residents loved it. That is perhaps the most disturbing detail of all. They did not feel trapped. They felt elevated. They felt special. They felt like they were evolving. The Watchers had created an environment so seductive, so beautiful, so intoxicating that the people inside it genuinely believed they were becoming something better than human. They called it ascension. They called it progress. They called it the next step in their development. The Watchers smiled and encouraged every step, knowing that each step took humanity further from the image of God and closer to something that served their own purposes. Subscribe to this channel because understanding these ancient patterns is the key to recognizing them in our world today. And trust me, the parallels are going to stun you. The city also served as a center of worship. But the worship in Enoch was not directed toward the Creator. It was directed toward the Watchers themselves. The Ethiopian texts describe rituals performed at the geometric center of the city where the spiritual energy was strongest. Blood rituals, ceremonies involving fire and sound, and the mixing of substances that the texts describe with deliberate vagueness, as if the scribes themselves were afraid of preserving too much detail. These rituals were designed to deepen the connection between the human residents and their angelic patrons. Each ceremony made the boundary thinner. Each ritual pulled the two worlds closer together. The Watchers had turned worship into technology. Prayer became programming. Devotion became a power source. And the human beings who participated believed with all their hearts that they were reaching toward heaven, when in reality they were building a ladder that led somewhere else entirely. But outside the walls of Enoch, something else was happening. The rest of humanity watched with a mixture of awe and horror. The descendants of Seth, Abel's replacement, the righteous line, looked down from their mountain settlements and saw the lights of the valley city glowing at night. They heard the music drifting up through the darkness. They sensed the power emanating from that place. And they were terrified, because they knew something was deeply wrong with what was being built in the valley. Yet even in their terror, some of them were beginning to feel curious. And curiosity, in this story, is the most dangerous force of all. The full truth about what the Watchers taught inside those walls goes even deeper than architecture and ritual. There was a curriculum, a systematic program of instruction that aimed to remake the human mind from the inside out. And the subjects taught in that program are the focus of what comes next. Chapter 5. The Curriculum of the Fallen. The forbidden knowledge taught by the Watchers was not scattered randomly. It was organized, it followed a progression, and it was designed to lead the human mind through stages, each one taking the student further from their original design. The Ethiopian texts, particularly the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, give us enough detail to reconstruct this curriculum. And when you see it laid out, the pattern is chilling. The first level of instruction was practical. This is what the general population received: metallurgy, animal husbandry, agricultural techniques that worked even on the cursed ground, musical instruments and the basics of rhythm and harmony, cosmetics, dyes, and the arts of personal beautification. These were the gifts that made the Watchers popular. These were the things that made Cain City attractive to outsiders. On the surface, every single one of these teachings seemed beneficial. They improved daily life. They solved problems. They made existence more comfortable and more beautiful. And that was exactly the point. The Watchers understood something about human nature that most people still do not grasp. Gratitude creates loyalty. When someone solves your problems, you trust them. When someone makes your life easier, you listen to what else they have to say. The practical knowledge was bait. It was the first step in a process that would eventually lead to much darker places. But no one who accepted the first gift ever suspected where the road would end. The second level was reserved for those who showed promise, the talented, the ambitious, the curious. These students were drawn deeper into the Watchers' confidence, and the subjects at this level were different. Astrology, not as simple stargazing, but as a system for reading the intentions of spiritual beings through celestial movements. Enchantments, which meant the manipulation of natural forces through spoken formulas and physical substances. The cutting of roots, which scholars believe refers to both herbal medicine and the creation of consciousness-altering compounds. And the reading of signs, which was divination in its purest form, the attempt to know the future through means other than divine revelation. At this level, the knowledge stopped being about improving daily life. It became about power. Power over nature. Power over other people. Power over the unseen forces that shaped reality behind the veil. The students at this level began to change, not just in what they knew, but in what they were. The Ethiopian texts describe them developing abilities that normal humans did not possess. Heightened senses, the ability to perceive spiritual beings directly, physical changes that set them apart from the general population. They were becoming something more than human, or perhaps something less. Like this video if you were starting to see why God could not let this continue. The corruption was not just moral, it was existential. The third level was the innermost circle, the school of the sons of twilight, and here, the Watchers dropped all pretense. The teachings at this level dealt with the fundamental nature of reality, creation, and the human soul. The students learned that the physical world was just one layer of a much larger structure, They learned that consciousness itself could be manipulated, expanded, fragmented, and reassembled. They learned techniques that the Ethiopian texts describe as blood magic and sex magic, rituals that used the most powerful forces in human experience, life and creation, as tools for breaking through dimensional barriers. But the central teaching, the one that held the entire curriculum together, was this: humanity was unfinished. God had created people incomplete on purpose. The Watchers claimed they had seen humanity's true design in the halls of heaven. They promised that through their teaching, humans could complete themselves. They could become like angels. They could become like gods. This lie was the engine that drove everything else. Every level of the curriculum was designed to support this one central deception. The practical knowledge proved that the Watchers could deliver results. The second level proved that human beings could indeed exceed their normal limitations. And the third level offered the ultimate prize: transcendence, divinity, the fulfillment of the serpent's original promise in the Garden of Eden. Share this with everyone you know, because the pattern we are uncovering here did not end with the ancient world. It is still operating today, and the consequences were catastrophic. The students of the innermost circle did not just learn forbidden knowledge. They became vessels for it. Their bodies changed. Their minds changed. Their very DNA, if we can use that modern term for what the ancient texts describe, was altered. They were no longer fully human in the way God had designed. They had been rewritten, edited, upgraded, if the Watchers' terminology is to be believed. But in God's eyes, they had been corrupted. This is the key to understanding everything that follows in the biblical narrative. The corruption was not just about bad behavior. It was not just about violence and immorality, though those things certainly exploded across the earth. The corruption was genetic. It was structural. It threatened the very blueprint of humanity. And that blueprint mattered because somewhere in the future, a Messiah was supposed to be born from a fully human lineage. If the human genome was corrupted beyond repair, if there were no fully human beings left on earth, then God's plan of redemption through a human savior would become impossible. The Watchers knew this. They understood the prophecy that God had spoken in the garden. Genesis 3:15. The seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head. The Watchers' entire operation, from the first small gift of metalworking to the deepest secrets of the innermost school, was aimed at one goal: corrupt the seed, contaminate the human bloodline so thoroughly that no pure human could ever be born again, and they came terrifyingly close to succeeding. The evidence of their near success was walking the earth. Massive, powerful, terrifying, the Nephilim had arrived, and with them the world would never be the same again. Chapter 6: The Giants and the Corruption of All Flesh. Genesis 6:4 is one of the most debated verses in the entire Bible. It says that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men of old, men of renown. The book of Enoch does not leave room for ambiguity. 1 Enoch chapter 7 states it plainly. The Watchers took human wives. Those wives became pregnant, and they gave birth to giants. These giants consumed everything humans produced. When the food ran out, they turned against humanity. They drank blood, they ate flesh, and the earth cried out against the violence. Now, we need to be honest about how disturbing this account is. The Nephilim were not gentle giants. They were predators, the biological result of an experiment that was never supposed to happen. Angelic nature merged with human flesh produced beings of immense physical power, but without the moral framework God had built into the human soul. They were weapons in living form. But here is what the competitor video you may have watched gets wrong. The Nephilim were not the Watchers' real success story. They were actually the obvious failure. The Nephilim were too big, too violent, too uncontrollable. They drew attention. They caused chaos. They made the situation impossible to ignore. The real success of the Watchers' program was much subtler. It was the gradual corruption of ordinary human beings through generations of forbidden knowledge and slow genetic contamination within Cain's lineage. Think about it this way. If you wanted to take over a country, Would you send in 1,000 giants who smash everything in sight? Or would you slowly change the thinking, the culture, the values, and eventually the very nature of the population until they did not even realize they had been conquered? The Nephilim were a side effect, a spectacular, terrifying side effect. But the quiet corruption flowing through the bloodline of Cain was the actual weapon, and it was working perfectly. Comment below and tell me which part of this story disturbs you the most, because what comes next is the part that connects everything to why God chose to flood the entire earth. Genesis 6:12 says that God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. Notice the phrase all flesh, not all behavior, not all morality, all flesh. The physical substance of living things had been corrupted. This was not a metaphor. The Hebrew word for flesh here is basar, and it refers to the physical body, the biological reality of what a creature is made of. Something had gone wrong with the very biology of life on earth. The Book of Jubilees confirms this reading. It describes a world in which not just humans but animals had been altered. The boundaries between species were being crossed. Hybrid creatures roamed the earth. The careful separations that God had established in creation, each animal after its kind, each plant after its kind, were being systematically dismantled. The Watchers had taught their students how to mix what should never be mixed, and the results were spreading across the planet like a disease. This corruption had reached a critical point. The Messiah's lineage was at stake. If every human bloodline became contaminated with angelic genetics, then the promise of a fully human Redeemer would become impossible. The serpent's head would never be crushed. The plan of salvation would fail, and the forces of rebellion would have won not through direct warfare with God, but through the patient, systematic corruption of the very species God had chosen to save the world. God's response was both terrible and necessary. Genesis 6:7 records his decision. I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But then comes verse 8, the most important but in the entire Old Testament. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So look right now, because the reason Noah was chosen is far more significant than most people realize. And it changes how you understand the entire story of the flood. Why Noah? Genesis 6:9 gives us a detail that is easy to overlook. It says Noah was just a man perfect in his generations. That last phrase, perfect in his generations, has been debated for millennia. The Hebrew word is tamim. It is the same word you broth to describe an unblemished animal fit for sacrifice. It does not mean morally perfect. It means genetically whole, uncontaminated, pure in his bloodline. Noah was chosen for the ark, not just because he was righteous, though he was. He was chosen because his family line had not been corrupted by the Watcher's program. His DNA, to use our modern language, was still fully human. He carried the unbroken line through which the Messiah could one day be born. The flood was not simply a punishment for bad behavior. It was a biological reset, a purging of corrupted genetics from the earth, a desperate act of preservation to save the human race from being permanently altered into something God had never designed. The waters came, the Nephilim drowned. The hybrid civilizations of Nod were swept away. The towers and temples and geometric cities that the Watchers had helped build were buried under miles of mud and water. But the Watchers themselves were not destroyed by the flood. They were immortal beings. First, Enoch tells us that God bound them. He imprisoned them in chains of darkness beneath the earth to await a final judgment. Their physical works were destroyed. Their students were killed. Their hybrid children perished. But the knowledge they had spread did not drown. Ideas cannot be killed by water. And somewhere, in the memory of the survivors, in the stories passed down through generations, the seeds of Nod survived, waiting to grow again. Before the flood washed everything away, though, there was one more crucial chapter in the pre-flood drama. It was the conflict between two families, two bloodlines, two ways of being human, and the story of how one family fell will break your heart. Chapter 7, the mountain and the valley after Cain killed Abel. God gave Adam and Eve another son. His name was Seth, and Seth, according to Genesis 4:26, began a line of people who called upon the name of the Lord. While Cain's descendants were building cities and forging weapons and learning the secrets of fallen angels in the valley, Seth's descendants were doing something far less spectacular, but far more important. They were praying. They were worshipping. They were maintaining the connection to God that Cain had severed. The Ethiopian book of Adam and Eve provides extraordinary detail about how Seth's family lived. They did not settle in the valley. They climbed the mountain, a high place often identified as the mountain of God, a physical elevation that served as a spiritual boundary. Up there, they lived simply. They grew what the ground provided. They worshipped together, and they stayed away from the valley. Adam himself, before he died, gave Seth a command: do not go down from the mountain. Do not let your children go down. The valley belongs to Cain. The valley belongs to the ones who fell. If you mix with them, everything will be lost. This was not just fatherly advice, it was prophecy. Adam had eaten the fruit. He had heard the serpent's lie. He had watched one son murder another. He knew what corruption looked like, and he knew that the greatest danger facing Seth's line was not violence from below, but attraction to below. For generations, the Sethites obeyed. They heard the music floating up from the valley at night. They saw the lights of the city of Enoch glowing against the dark sky. They knew that something powerful and seductive existed down there, but they stayed where they were. They chose faithfulness over curiosity, but time wears down even the strongest walls. The Ethiopian texts describe a gradual erosion over several generations. The elders who had known Adam personally died. The stories they told became legends. The warnings they gave became traditions, and traditions can feel like chains to young people who have never seen the dangers those chains were meant to prevent. Like this video, if you understand that the battle between faithfulness and curiosity is still happening today. Because this ancient pattern repeats in every generation, the younger Sethites began to ask questions. Why can we not go to the valley? What are those lights? Why do we live simply when they live in splendor? The elders answered with warnings and appeals to faith, but the young had not experienced what the old had witnessed. They only knew that a world of wonder waited just a short walk down the mountain, and they were forbidden from experiencing it. The book of Adam and Eve describes the moment the barrier broke. A group of young Sephite men heard the music from the valley more clearly than usual one evening. The text says the sound was sweet beyond measure. It pulled at something deep inside them, and one of them, then another, then a group, made the decision to descend, not to stay, just to look, just to see, just to satisfy a curiosity that had been building for lifetimes. They promised each other they would come back before morning. They did not come back before morning. What they found in the valley overwhelmed them. The beauty of Cain's women, enhanced by the cosmetic arts Azazel had taught. The music that vibrated through their bodies in ways they had never experienced. The food and wine and sensory pleasures that made their simple mountain life feel like poverty. They were captivated. They were enchanted, in the most literal sense of the word. The enchantments that the Watchers had taught were woven into the very fabric of valley life. And these young men from the mountain who had no defenses against such things were caught like fish in a net. When news reached the mountain that the young men had not returned, there was grief. There were prayers. There were elders who went down to bring them back. But some of the elders themselves were overwhelmed by what they encountered in the valley. The corruption was not a frontal assault. It was an embrace. The valley people welcomed the mountain people with open arms. Come, join us. See what we have built. Share in our prosperity. Your God left you on a rock with nothing. Our teachers gave us everything. Why would you choose poverty when paradise is right here? Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because this pattern of temptation is exactly what happens in our world every single day. The intermarriage began. Seth's sons took Cain's daughters. The bloodline that God had kept pure through Seth began to merge with the bloodline that the Watchers had been corrupting for generations. And this was not just a moral failure. It was the catastrophe that triggered the end of the world. Genesis 6:2 records it with devastating simplicity. The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. Some scholars believe this verse refers specifically to the Watchers taking human wives. Others believe it describes the Sethites descending and marrying the daughters of Cain's line. The Ethiopian tradition suggests both were happening simultaneously. The Watchers were interbreeding with humans directly, producing the Nephilim, and the Sethites were intermarrying with the already corrupted line of Cain, diluting the last pure human genetics on Earth. The attack was coming from every direction at once. Within just a few generations, the distinction between the mountain and the valley disappeared completely. The Sethites, who had been humanity's last spiritual anchor, were absorbed into the culture of Nod. Their worship stopped. Their prayers went silent. Their connection to God, maintained through generations of faithful obedience, was severed. And God looked down at the earth and saw that every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. Not some, not most, every. The corruption was total. The program was nearly complete. Nearly. Because on one mountain, in one family, one man still walked with God. His name was Noah, and his story was about to become the most important story in human history. But even after the floodwaters receded and the earth was clean again, the spirit of Nod was not dead. It was sleeping. And in our final chapter, we will trace its awakening through the centuries all the way to the world you and I live in right now. Chapter 8. The spirit of Nod never drowned. The floodwaters receded. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Noah and his family stepped out onto a world washed clean. No Nephilim walked the earth. No towers of forbidden geometry pierced the sky. No music designed to alter human consciousness drifted through the air. The civilization of Nod was buried under layers of mud and silence. But here is the uncomfortable truth that the biblical record forces us to confront. The patterns of Nod came back, and they came back fast. Genesis 11 gives us the first clear echo, the Tower of Babel. Humanity gathered together on a plain in the land of Shinar and said, "Let us build a city and a tower whose top reaches into the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves." Read those words carefully. A city, a tower designed to breach the boundary between earth and heaven, a desire to become something greater than what God had made them. This is not new thinking. This is the Nod curriculum, resurfacing in post-flood soil. How did it survive? The knowledge itself was carried in human memory. Noah's family, though genetically pure, lived in a world shaped by centuries of Watcher influence. The stories, the techniques, the philosophy of self-transcendence had been absorbed into human culture so deeply that even a global flood could not wash them completely away. The bodies drowned, the ideas floated, and the book of Enoch warns us about something else. The Watchers were bound in chains of darkness, but their influence did not require their physical presence. The spirits of the Nephilim who had died in the flood became what the ancient texts call evil spirits. 1 Enoch chapter 15 says that because the Nephilim were born from the union of spirit and flesh, their spirits could not rest. They became wandering entities, invisible but active, continuing to influence humanity even after their bodies were destroyed. Subscribe now and stay with this channel, because once you see these patterns, you will never look at history the same way again. Trace the pattern through the ancient world. Babylon built ziggurats as stairways between heaven and earth. Egypt raised pyramids using geometric knowledge that modern engineers still struggle to explain. The mystery schools of Greece and Rome taught secrets about human potential in degrees of progressive revelation, exactly the same structure as the Watchers' curriculum. Each civilization that rose to greatness had a teaching tradition that promised transcendence through forbidden knowledge. Different names, different cultures, same pattern. The Ethiopian church fathers saw these connections clearly. They told that the spirit of Nod was an active spiritual force that would manifest in every generation until the end of the age. Whenever a civilization pursues transcendence through technology rather than through relationship with God, the spirit of Nod is at work. Whenever human beings are told they are unfinished and that the solution is found in enhancement or merging with something beyond the human, the old curriculum is being taught again. Like this video and share it with every believer you know, because what I am about to say is not ancient history. It is tonight's news. Look at the world right now. Transhumanism has moved from the fringe to the mainstream. Neuralink promises to merge human consciousness with artificial intelligence. Gene editing gives scientists the ability to rewrite human DNA. Virtual reality creates artificial dimensions where the boundaries between real and unreal dissolve. Every single one of these pursuits is a direct echo of the Watcher's program. The promise is the same. You are unfinished. Technology will complete you. All you have to do is cross the line. Secret societies have preserved fragments of the ancient knowledge through the centuries. Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and Theosophy all teach systems of progressive initiation. The structure is identical to the Watcher's curriculum. Practical knowledge at the outer levels. Esoteric knowledge at the inner levels. And at the center, the same ancient promise: you can become like gods. So where does this leave us? Standing at the same crossroads that the sons of Seth faced when they looked down from their mountain at the lights of the valley. We live in a world more powerful and more dangerous than any civilization since the time of Noah. The promises of transcendence are louder than the whispers of any fallen angel in the city of Enoch, and the choice is the same. Do we stay on the mountain? Do we trust that we were made complete in God's image? Or do we descend into the valley? Jesus himself said in Matthew 24:37, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." He was pointing back to the specific conditions that made the flood necessary. The blurring of boundaries, the corruption of flesh, the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. We are living in the echo of Nod. The question is not whether the pattern will repeat. It is already repeating. Will we be the generation that descends the mountain, or will we be the family of Noah, standing firm, keeping the faith, and waiting for the God who keeps his promises? The story of Cain and Nod is not finished. It will not be finished until the God who shut the door of the ark speaks the final word over all of history. And when he does, every tower built in defiance of heaven will fall. Every secret taught in darkness will be brought into the light. And every soul that chose the mountain will understand why faithfulness was always worth more than the glittering promises of Nod. That is the truth hidden in the oldest story ever told. And now that you have heard it, you can never unhear it. Subscribe, share this with the people you love, and remember that the God who preserved Noah has not forgotten your name either.